A lot of people tell me I need to touch grass, and I couldn't agree more. Unfortunately, that's just not really my thing. However, I do touch grass in RPGs, which is the next best thing. And wilderness is an all-encompassing part of RPGs. It's hard to pinpoint a game that doesn't primarily take place away from civilization. You go from town to town, city to city, but in between that time, you spend it away from society. It's one of those things that doesn't feel as unrelatable as it really is. I can personally go months without leaving the city, sometimes months without leaving my own house, but it's a touchy subject. I used to be enamored by all the fantastical set pieces these worlds entail, but recently, I've taken a step back and looked at even the most simple locations in absolute awe. Of course, I could just go outside and do this in real life, but in the real world, I don't have a giant planet-destroying sword. I've always emphasized how gorgeous I find some of these places, and it's an aspect of RPGs I don't see mentioned as much as I'd like. A lot of discussion is usually around gameplay, story, and the characters, but how it's all implemented into the setting is what truly brings it together. That sounds quite obvious. The setting is obviously one of the most important aspects of a storytelling medium, but how that setting is portrayed within the game is an aspect that even I take for granted a lot of the time. You'd never think of it, but most of Chrono Trigger is spent in a forest, wasteland, jungle, and it's isolating. If a game doesn't explicitly outline the time frame in which the story takes place, I like to imagine my own where the characters could spend weeks or even months traveling. 30 seconds to me in the overworld might be an entire day for them. Plains are the most common starting set piece. You'll find it in any game, no matter what world it is. It's hard to fit a super intimidating set of enemies into this type of location, just due to its nature. When I think of plains in real life, I think of serenity, a place to keep my guard down. There's a sense of security because of how visible everything is, and it's also just a familiar environment to most of us. I really love the way Final Fantasy VII uses this biome because of this reason. We start the game in these gloomy, dingy, urban slums. I mean, even the rich people here are living like shit. It's all pretty dark tonally as well, so eventually, going to the surface and seeing these beautiful sweeping landscapes that will be completely unremarkable in any other Final Fantasy game before is so impactful. And even then, it's still very earthy looking and isolated. With actual threatening enemies around here, I could definitely see someone getting purry madness from this scenery. Final Fantasy VI does the opposite of this, where the mundane landscapes we know all too well are torn away from us. The game's art being so gorgeous makes it even more tragic, and there are very few points later on where this beauty is recaptured. Love me the Dino Forest though. Even then, FF6 uses a lot of earthy, doled out colors as well that completely changes the vibe of the environment. I wouldn't say it's a dark fantasy setting, the first half anyway, but it borders on that at times. Contrast this with Tales of Symphonia. These plains are serene, and I would love to frolic here. It'd be perfect for a picnic date, barring all the wolves and large mantis-like creatures. Plus, a lot of the overworld in most games is plains, even if we don't get to zoom in and see it. How a game handles the plains biome is a pretty good indicator for how the rest of it will feel vibes-wise. Now the forest is a whole other ball game. There is a shocking amount of flexibility that can be done here. There are lots of different variations of forests. How about an autumn themed one? Those always show up time to time. November is my favorite month. It's also my birthday month, so kinda biased, but these always give me those vibes. You can also do a spooky forest, which I much prefer over the haunted mansion setting. Not many RPGs, from what I've seen, actually include a distinct spooky forest setting, despite it being pretty prevalent in a lot of media. Generally, forests are a great way to emphasize how truly far away you are from civilization. It can be used as a tool to scare the audience, especially in games where being away from towns is scary. But it can be utilized as a cozy resting place, especially in later parts of a game where things start to get serious and the wild is no longer a threat. In general, most games transition from the wilderness feeling like the main threat to the dungeons. Once you're stocked up on materials and can traverse relatively easily, it no longer stays frightening, especially if you have good overworld transportation. Jungles feel like the natural evolution of this. I mean, in real life, I would much rather be lost in a giant forest than a giant jungle. And we put our fear of what the jungle entails into these games as pretty perilous mid-game areas. You can be unique with it and add dinosaurs, or maybe sprinkle in a few ancient temples here and there. I also find gameplay-wise, I get lost in these quite often too. They feature lots of winding paths, and it doesn't help that so much of it blends together. For some reason, a much weirder set piece that is surprisingly common is the party being engulfed by some type of creature and having to find a way out. It always leads to a creative dungeon, and it's a very fun set piece every time it appears, despite it not being wholly unique. A lot of the time, the characters are swallowed by a giant whale. However, they do occasionally get creative with it, like a metaphor where they're swallowed by this giant human. If you haven't played the game, you're probably confused on why I'm calling this thing a human. A lot of non-RPGs do this too. It's actually a really common trope. It goes back thousands of years, so I'm not surprised. This is also where I went to make the arbitrary distinction between the words nature and wilderness. In the context of this video, nature is anything that occurs in the natural world. You can still be in society, but be surrounded by nature, like those forests or beach towns that appear in many games, but wilderness is more isolated. You're almost solely surrounded by the natural world, completely engulfed in it. It's the difference between being lost in a small park and being lost in the Amazon rainforest. There are parts of Dragon Quest XI where you'll be away from civilization for quite a long time, and even when you are in the towns, they use the nature around them to such a great extent. That part where you play as a fish is genius and one of my favorite things in any game ever. And I think that's a good time to segue to ocean settings in general. Beaches and the oceans are my favorite settings in any piece of media, and for RPGs it's no different. A lot of the times, it's portrayed pretty typically, but stuff like Chrono Cross and Final Fantasy X take this setting to the extreme and do so many amazing things with it. And these are some of the few games that I see portray the horror of the deep ocean, one of my favorite real life settings. A certain UFO 50 RPG does this exact thing in fact. You play as a weird reptile diver going deeper and deeper into the horrors of the ocean. The underwater set piece is in fact much less common than beaches anyway. It's just much harder to come up with an excuse for a party to go down there. But when we are, it's always gorgeous and so relaxing. In general, these tend to be relaxing detours with beautiful art, especially when the game is a day and night cycle. Sailing Era is an RPG that I think utilizes the ocean setting the most out of any other RPG I've played. It pays a lot of homage to Uncharted Waters and just looks absolutely gorgeous. I would love to get lost at sea in this world. What happened? Where am I? Am I in a wasteland? Maybe. What could be defined as a wasteland is quite broad in my eyes.
Hey dude, the entire world ended, we're scavenging for food, I haven't eaten in days, and you're still over here making a f***ing YouTube video.
You gotta do what you gotta do, man. The show must go on.
I am going to eat you.
You can look at a series like Middle Max, where most of the games are essentially wasteland, but despite this, the lighthearted atmosphere doesn't make it as perilous as in other series. This is a really unique take on the setting that I think elevates the message and atmosphere of this game. The entire world is basically cooked and everything is ruined, but despite that, humans somehow still find a way to be the worst, most violent force, despite the little resources we have. In these man-made wasteland settings, it truly emphasizes the worst aspect of humanity, as all the desecration around us is the fault of our own actions. And humanity continues being horrible even after the fact, really out of necessity, because no sane person is surviving a post-war wasteland. The normal people are all demoralized husks, while everyone else is ludicrously insane. But Metal Max takes a unique approach where the world is still functioning as if there wasn't an apocalypse, just very dysfunctionally. Natural wastelands are much less common as a setting and are thematically more boring. I know deserts aren't wastelands, but I'll include them under this because I don't think they have too much variety compared to the other stuff I mentioned. Deserts tend to be my least favorite parts of a game due to the lack of variety in them or the annoying game mechanics, but they can be used greatly. I love how FF12's first real area starts out in the desert. It feels rewarding once you get through it and see the beauty of nature for the first time in the game. I especially anticipate it because of how gorgeous the game is, and I want to see how they handle the other settings. Same with FF15, but I don't like it as much here. Plus, I classify it more as shrubland if anything. That barren feeling is there all the same, however, but it gets too overbearing, and I think there should be a balance. Along with Wastelands, mountains are peak isolation. Maybe it's a grassy mountain, or a snowy mountain, or a barren mountain. A lot of the times, mountains are used to reach another part of the world that you can't get to on the world map, sort of as an intermediary area. Take the giant wall in Grandia. It's technically not a mountain, but it captures the triumph of traversing it so well that I can't not mention it. Getting to the top is probably my favorite moment in the entire game. It's so exhilarating. I noticed that they always tend to appear at the early parts of the middle of the game, opening up so much more to the player, and letting you know that what you just went through previously isn't even half of it. After experiencing this, I truly understand why people of Mount Everest do it, because I eat it up every time. These mountains, most of the time, feature caves, which brings me to that. There are so many things you can do with caves. Beach caves, ice caves, crystal caves. Most games start with a cave near the beginning that is rather typical, just stone and a few cave-themed enemies like bats and bugs. These are just as prevalent as plains and will appear multiple times throughout the game. Sometimes they'll also feature a lost ancient civilization with puzzles you need to figure out. Unlike mountains, these caves don't help me understand why people go caving in real life. In fact, it makes me even more confused. I constantly get lost in these video game caves. In real life, I could go through the easiest, most straightforward cave ever and still somehow end up like John Jones. It really is crazy how much you can do with caves though, more than you would expect. Try a secret pirate hideout, weird alien cave, prehistoric cave, or a magma cave. I have to commend the fact that the cave setting never gets boring like the desert setting, despite their real life counterparts having around the same level of variety most of the time. Just like mountains, a lot of the times, caves are used as intermediary areas to transition from one area of the map to another. Although narratively, they have a lot more flexibility than mountains. Maybe you're only delving into the cave to acquire a certain resource. Leaving the underground, on the opposite side of the spectrum, let's look at floating islands. These are very common in JRPGs because, well, Japan itself is an island surrounded by a bunch of smaller islands. The lore explanations for these existing are either just non-existent, or it comes down to mana power keeping them up in the air. There is always some type of settlement up here, whether it be small sky island towns or giant floating cities. Even when you are in the areas where it isn't clear you are up in the air, you still have that feeling in the back of your mind that you are thousands of feet up. Everything else in the world is so far away from you, and this place might as well be its own separate thing. The most obvious example is Chrono Trigger. It's probably the most famous part of this game, but there are much less talked about floating islands in this that are held together by giant chains. Instead of music, all you can hear is the wind violently blowing in your face as the fog encompasses most of the screen. I hugely appreciate the wilderness in these floating islands. Being in a floating town/city feels isolating enough, but being completely alone in this landmass defying gravity is so serene. This place is also called the Mountain of Woe, despite it clearly being a floating island. And no, it being chained to the ground doesn't make it a mountain. I don't care what it says. Etrian Odyssey Nexus revolves its entire world around this, and it's enchanting. Non-floating islands are a whole other beast. I know I talked about oceans and beaches earlier, but regular islands deserve their own attention. Etrian Odyssey 3 does islands immaculately. Each one feels like its own contained world. It's what islands are best at in my opinion, being able to be disjointed from other areas, justifiably so. And the ocean setting itself is such a perfect buffer. The feeling of exploration is unmatched, especially when the soundtrack slaps. I know right now I'm doing this dichotomy where I talk about one setting then contrast it with the opposite, but I kind of miss my opportunity with that when it comes to desert. So here's a brief mention of snowy areas. This is both its own thing and also a subgroup of different areas. When it comes to snowy areas in RPGs, they'll either be really cozy with vaguely festive sounding music or absolutely uninhabitable hellscapes. No in between. Compared to everything else I mentioned, snowy area is less of its own setting and more of a category that can be applied to anything. You can have a snowy forest, or a snowy cave, or a snowy mountain, snowy wasteland. There's a lot you can do. Black Sigil uses constant snow at the beginning to paint a bleak, uncomfortable, harsh world. Even the towns feel barren and lifeless, with the constant snow and nobody outside. Since we got most of the obvious stuff out of the way, I want to talk about some more unconventional settings that might apply to some more specific games, rather than a number of them. The Abyss. Now this is a super non-specific area that can apply to a lot of things. The end of time I would characterize as being part of this vague abyss category. There's always something supernatural going on here, whether it be dark magic or time trickery. It's a seemingly endless, incomprehensible darkness that would make anyone go crazy if they get lost in it for even a few mere hours. Earlier, I mentioned that the deep sea is my favorite real-life setting, and this is very reminiscent of that. The real-life deep sea is such a weird, messed up place, teeming with alien-looking creatures. Seriously, they do not look like they belong on Earth. It feels too cool to be true, and my obsession with this place as a kid was wholly justified. The anglerfish was my favorite creature for the longest time. Now I'm basic, so my favorite animal is a bunny. I can't believe I lost my edge. It's not an RPG, but I just have to mention it. The deep, dark area in Echo the Dolphin is a masterclass in atmosphere. Fighting this giant, disgusting alien creature hiding in the deep, dark depths of the ocean will never not be the coolest thing ever. And the idea of a hostile alien hiding in the depths of the ocean is horrifying because we as humans wouldn't even know it. It's the perfect hiding spot. I'd also count space as being included under this abyss category as well, which means FF8 gets another mention again through the space scenes. I'll never get the image of Renoa quietly floating through space out of my head. The thought of ever being in that situation mortifies me. Star Ocean is another obvious mention for this, but we spend most of our time in space in the comfort of our high-tech ships. Hell is an even more breathtakingly scary setting. In games, it's not always specifically described as actually being hell or the underworld, but most of the time, it's pretty obvious what the themes are. The enemies here are something else, absolute horrors beyond the character's comprehension. It'll feature hard as hell bosses and a constant feeling of dread. A game will tend to get brutal here if it wasn't already. I mean, it is the underworld, it should be brutal, but man, it can seriously be stressful sometimes. Since hell is more of a concept, you can do a lot with this as long as it remains disgusting and horrifying. Exdeath's castle in Final Fantasy V, despite the graphical limitations, is one of the most morbidly amazing things I've seen in any game. An entire labyrinth made out of human flesh, twitching, pulsating. I can imagine the screams in this place. I don't think the characters get enough credit for being able to get through this without having at least a few PTSD flashbacks. Also, Exdeath is a sentient tree, and the point of the dungeon is him flipping the script on us debaucherous humans and showing us how it feels to make our settlements on another living thing's body. I mean, shoot, it's effective. This place is evil. Like I said, since hell is more of a concept, it can be interpreted very loosely from game to game, but there are a lot of more traditional interpretations of it. Shin Megami Tensei has a lot of hellish themes with some Japanese flair to it that I don't fully understand because I know nothing about Japanese mythology or religion. Also, Diablo is the most obvious mention. I wanted to see how long I could go without mentioning it. I've talked about most of the environments I wanted to discuss, so I think it'd be nice if we took a closer look at how the game's civilizations are built around these areas. I talked about it briefly, but a lot can be done with these different set pieces when it comes to building a society. How do they take into account the world around them and use the unique traits to craft a whimsical but realistic town or city? Pokemon is the most obvious series to look at when analyzing how they use their unique set pieces for town design. It almost feels like cheating, in fact. Try a town where people live in tree houses and use bridges to traverse. Or one which borrows from real-life Japanese architectural aesthetics and features this large-ass swaying tower just north of it. Yes, I did only bring it up to flex my shiny ho-oh. Or a deeply cool dark forest town with large bioluminescent mushrooms and gargantuan trees everywhere. Even when they are not functionally using the environment, they always play into the aesthetic in such neat and creative ways. Ever Oasis has multiple settlements engulfed entirely by desert, except for the main town which is built around an oasis. The Dragon Quest games often base their town designs off of late medieval style city layouts. And each game has pretty similar looking town themes and designs, often to the point of feeling like you're getting deja vu. The floating citadel in Dragon Quest IX is a floating island settlement that is essentially located in heaven. Quite a few of these floating landscapes are encompassed solely by human, or in this case angel, settlements with no wilderness to be found. What about secret cave hideouts? These are very common. Everyone knows if you want to be a resistance fighter, you need a nice good cave to hide in. They tend to be very disorganized and story-wise don't last long because they're always being threatened by a larger force. Live Alive does quite a few unique things with its human settlements. One I would like to point out is the American Western town. You don't see this too much in RPGs, and you have to admit it's wholly unique. Earthbound does a more modern take on this. Instead of a Wild West centered town, it's a highway with one small shop on the side of the road, which is quite familiar to any of you who have traveled further down south in the US. Hero's Adventure, a Chinese grid-based RPG, consists of many small settlements in large cities, obviously based on China. What's unique here is the different hierarchies and how characters interact with the world outside of them. It costs money to travel from place to place, and it's entirely possible to be stuck in the wilderness. You can even be kicked out of the city and be forced back into the back-breaking life of a rural villager. And have you even looked at Magical Oasis? This place reminds me of those resort islands in the Maldives. Some games will use very blatantly flashy aesthetics to signify the wealth of a place. Like Aurea in Breath of Fire, which has buildings literally made entirely out of gold bricks. On the opposite end of that, we have people in Metal Max 3 living in dilapidated buildings and parking lots, the crumbling remnants of a once great civilization. Developers get so unique, and it's hard not to appreciate the amount of care and effort they put into not just the designs, but also the world building. There are so many hierarchies and histories to uncover that make everything come together like a puzzle. Making this video helped me appreciate how each series interprets and utilizes their settings differently, and I implore you to analyze these areas more closely yourself next time you get the chance to. Note all the little intricacies that might make one developer stand out differently from another. Note all the tropes, how the environments are generally utilized, and it will make you appreciate the DNA of all of these games so much more. Anyway, the video is over, so you can go now. I'm going to go and scavenge for food in this post-apocalyptic wasteland. Peace out, everybody. Oh my god, I'm so thirsty. Who knew the apocalypse would be this hot?